It was a brisk morning in Washington, D.C., and the political atmosphere was already charged with tension. The news networks were buzzing with the latest headline: Bernie Sanders criticizes former President Donald Trump in a fiery speech. The statement quickly spread across every major platform, stirring debate among both supporters and critics. Bernie Sanders, known for his bold opinions and fiery passion for justice, stood before a crowd of students and activists at a university town hall. The audience was eager to hear his thoughts on recent political events, but no one expected what came next. As the cameras rolled and microphones captured every word, Sanders leaned forward and declared firmly, "Donald Trump is not just a political opponent. He is a demagogue and a criminal who has undermined democracy for personal gain." The crowd erupted into applause, cheering the senator's unfiltered words. His supporters waved banners, nodding in agreement as Sanders listed examples of what he believed were Trump's dangerous actions. From divisive speeches to alleged misuse of power, he spoke passionately about the need for honesty and transparency in leadership, claiming that democracy could not survive if people remained silent against those who manipulate it. Within minutes, Sanders' statement began trending online. Hashtags filled social media timelines, and clips of his speech circulated across YouTube, Twitter, and major news outlets. Supporters of Sanders praised his courage, while Trump's loyal base saw the comments as an insult, and they knew Trump would not stay silent for long at his residence in Florida. Donald Trump was reportedly watching a news recap of the event when Sanders' remarks flashed across the screen. He leaned back, smirked slightly, and shook his head. Those who knew Trump understood that whenever he felt challenged publicly, he would always fire back, and usually, his responses were sharp, surprising, and meant to dominate the headlines in his characteristic fashion. Trump wasted no time. Within hours, he took to his social media platform, addressing Sanders' accusations head-on. The post was short, direct, and powerful, the kind of message that instantly captured public attention. Trump's words would soon ignite the political scene and leave even some of his critics momentarily speechless. But at this point, the nation only knew the beginning of what was about to become one of the most talked-about verbal showdowns between two of America's most outspoken political figures. The stage was set for a dramatic back-and-forth, and neither man intended to back down easily. Only a few hours after Bernie Sanders' fiery speech went viral, Donald Trump's team released an official statement, but it wasn't just a statement. It was a full-blown counterattack. In true Trump fashion, he began with confidence and sarcasm, dismissing Bernie's remarks as just another desperate cry for attention. During an evening press event at his Mar-a-Lago estate, Trump faced a sea of flashing cameras. Standing at the podium, he gave that familiar smirk and began, "Bernie Sanders, the man who talks about socialism and fairness but has never built anything real in his life, wants to lecture me about democracy? Give me a break." The crowd of supporters laughed and applauded. Trump continued, his tone shifting between humor and seriousness. "He calls me a demagogue and a criminal. Well, Bernie, I call you a professional complainer. You've been in politics for decades, and what have you actually done for the American people? Nothing but speeches and slogans." His words spread across every news outlet within minutes. The media quickly replayed the clip, dissecting each phrase and analyzing his tone. Political analysts debated whether this was a strategic move to turn attention back toward Trump's influence or just another emotional reaction. Meanwhile, on social media, Trump's clapback began trending worldwide. Hashtags like #TrumpResponds and #BernieVSTrump exploded across platforms. Some users praised Trump for defending himself, while others accused him of avoiding the real issues Bernie had raised. Behind the scenes, Bernie's team watched the reaction closely. Sanders himself, though calm in public, reportedly told his aides, "This was expected. He's trying to change the conversation." He decided to take a measured approach rather than respond immediately. But the media didn't slow down. Major news networks organized special panels featuring political experts, former White House staffers, and journalists. They debated everything, from the ethics of Sanders' accusations to Trump's strategy of counterpunching. It became a national talking point overnight. What made the moment even more intense was Trump's final remark at the event. As he was leaving the podium, a reporter shouted, "Mr. Trump, do you think Bernie Sanders is lying about you?" Trump turned back with a grin and said, "I think Bernie's forgotten what truth looks like. Maybe he needs a reminder, and I'll be happy to give it to him." That sentence alone became the spark for a new wave of political tension. By morning, it wasn't just a war of words. It was a full media storm. Every journalist wanted to know, would Bernie respond, or would he stay silent? The public was divided, the debate was heating up, and the rivalry between the two men had only just begun. The next morning, Bernie Sanders appeared calm, but his team could tell he was preparing something big. Overnight, his social media accounts had been flooded with messages, some praising his courage, others urging him to respond to Trump's fiery remarks. Bernie knew that if he wanted to make a lasting impact, his next move had to be strategic, factual, and impossible to dismiss. At precisely 9 a.m., Bernie's communications director announced that the senator would hold a press conference at the Capitol. Reporters gathered quickly, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The atmosphere was tense, buzzing with anticipation. Bernie stepped up to the podium, adjusted his glasses, and began in his steady, passionate tone. "Yesterday, Donald Trump called me a complainer. He said I've done nothing for the American people. Let me remind him of something. Public service is not about building towers or casinos. It's about building hope, justice, and fairness for working people." The audience fell silent. Cameras clicked rapidly as Bernie continued, this time pulling out a stack of documents. He began listing the legislative reforms he had supported, healthcare initiatives, education funding, workers' rights, and social programs that had improved lives for millions of Americans. "I don't need to defend myself with insults," he said firmly. "I'll defend myself with facts. What I say about Trump isn't personal. It's political truth." He then turned his attention directly to Trump's legacy, criticizing what he described as the culture of division and misinformation that had flourished during his presidency. Bernie's words were sharp but carefully measured. He never crossed into personal attack. Instead, he focused on principles and integrity. "When I call someone a demagogue," Bernie explained, "I mean a person who uses fear and anger to divide people. And when I call someone a criminal, I refer to actions that undermine the trust of the public. That is not hatred, it's accountability." The crowd applauded, some even standing. For the first time since the controversy began, Bernie's response appeared to regain control of the narrative. His supporters praised him for maintaining composure and sticking to facts instead of resorting to the same style of confrontation Trump was known for. Within an hour, the press conference went viral. Major news outlets played the clip under headlines like, "Bernie Sanders fights back with calm precision," and "Bernie responds with facts, not fury." Even some neutral commentators admired his approach. Political analyst Dana Richards remarked, "Sanders just turned the conversation from personality to policy, and that's where Trump's team might struggle to keep up." Meanwhile, Trump was said to be watching the entire event from his private office. His reaction was unreadable. Those close to him said he leaned back silently, tapping his desk, clearly thinking about his next move. The political battle had evolved from name-calling into a calculated chess game, and both men knew that every move from here on would shape the public's perception for weeks to come. Later that evening, Donald Trump made his move. The sun had barely set over Palm Beach when his communications team called an unscheduled press conference. Within an hour, major news outlets were broadcasting live from outside Mar-a-Lago. Reporters whispered among themselves, wondering if Trump would respond directly to Bernie's facts. Trump walked onto the stage with his signature confidence, waving briefly before taking the microphone. He started with a familiar smile and said, "Well, folks, it looks like Bernie gave another long speech today. Lots of papers, lots of numbers, but as usual, no results." The crowd laughed, and Trump continued, pacing the stage like a performer who knew exactly how to keep his audience hooked. "Bernie says he's about facts. Let's talk about facts. The fact is, under my administration, America had one of the strongest economies in history. Unemployment hit record lows. People had jobs, businesses were thriving, and the country was respected again. That's not talk, that's action." His voice grew firmer, echoing across the hall as supporters cheered. "Bernie talks about fairness, but he's been in Washington for over 30 years and hasn't fixed a single thing. He blames everyone but himself. The difference between us is simple: I build, he blames. As the cameras rolled, Trump skillfully shifted the narrative from Bernie's moral criticism to his own record of leadership. He painted himself as a man of results, contrasting Bernie's decades of political service with his own image as a successful outsider who got things done. Then, with a deliberate pause, Trump added, "Bernie called me a demagogue. Maybe he doesn't know what that means. I call it speaking the truth that the establishment doesn't want to hear. And he called me a criminal? Funny thing, I haven't been convicted of anything. Maybe Bernie should worry about fixing problems instead of throwing names around." The statement hit hard. The room erupted in applause. Some reporters noted that Trump had managed to reframe the entire debate, turning Bernie's accusations into a question of credibility rather than morality. The next morning, the media once again exploded. Talk shows, political podcasts, and YouTube analysts replayed Trump's remarks, dissecting his every line. His supporters hailed it as a masterclass in counterpunching, while critics accused him of twisting the facts and ignoring accountability. Meanwhile, Bernie's team gathered in their office to assess the situation. A young advisor broke the silence, saying, "He's trying to turn it into a popularity contest again." Bernie nodded slowly, his expression serious. "Yes," he said, "and that's exactly what we can't allow. This isn't about who's louder. It's about who's right." But Bernie knew that facts alone wouldn't be enough in a media-driven battle. To keep the public engaged, he would need to connect emotionally, to remind Americans why this debate mattered for the future of their democracy. The next move would have to be bold, precise, and deeply human, something that could reach hearts as much as minds. 2 days later, Bernie Sanders' campaign team gathered in a packed conference room in Washington, D.C. The air was thick with anticipation. The media storm was still raging, and Trump's last speech had dominated every headline. Bernie's advisors knew they needed something powerful, something that would remind the public why Sanders had earned such a loyal following over the years. Bernie sat quietly for a few minutes before finally speaking. "We've talked about facts. We've talked about fairness. But now," he said, looking around the room, "it's time we talk about people." His team immediately understood. They began organizing a nationwide town hall. Not a debate, not a press event, but a direct conversation with ordinary Americans. The event was called Voices of the People, Reclaiming Democracy. It was designed to feature stories from workers, teachers, nurses, and small business owners, people who represented the real struggles of the middle and working class. When the day came, the hall was full. Cameras were rolling, but the tone was calm, heartfelt, and honest. Bernie walked on stage, shook hands with the audience, and began with a soft but determined voice. "I'm not here tonight to talk about Donald Trump. I'm here to talk about you, the people who make this country work every single day." The audience applauded gently. Then, one by one, citizens stood up to share their stories. A single mother struggling to afford health care, a retired veteran worried about housing, a young student buried under debt. Bernie listened to each of them, nodding, sometimes even taking notes. After several testimonies, he stood up again. "These are the real issues," he said, his voice rising with passion. "While some leaders spend their time calling names or defending their egos, millions of Americans are fighting just to survive. That's not leadership, that's distraction. And I refuse to be silent about it." The crowd erupted in applause. The cameras captured every moment as Bernie's speech became less about politics and more about principle. He reminded the audience that democracy wasn't about one man or one office. It was about collective responsibility. "We can disagree on policies," he said, "but we cannot disagree on human dignity." By the time the event ended, the internet was flooded with clips of Bernie's emotional appeal. Hashtags like #Voices of the People and #Bernie Speaks for Us began trending across platforms. Even some who weren't normally his supporters admitted that his sincerity was moving. Political analysts noted how effectively Bernie had shifted the spotlight. One commentator said on live television, "Trump thrives in confrontation. Bernie just took the fight out of the arena and brought it back to the people. And that's a move even Trump will have to think twice about before countering." Meanwhile, in Florida, Trump's aides showed him the coverage. He watched quietly, arms crossed, saying nothing for a long moment. Then, with a small grin, he said, "He's good, but the show's not over." It was clear, both men had now turned the conflict into something far larger than a political spat. It had become a battle over the heart of America's democracy, and neither side was ready to back down.